Well, if you're like me, you're jumping into the Modern Warfare 3 multiplayer beta and you've had your fair share of some bad games. It happens, but how can you better improve in this game? Despite being very familiar to experiences we've seen in the past, it still may have a bit of a learning curve for you. So today I want to run down some general tips here for the beta and how you can end up improving your game in just a handful of those simple tips. So as we go along, drop your thoughts down below on how you're feeling about the beta if you jumped in and played on PlayStation so far. Are you looking forward to it if you're on Xbox or PC? Whatever the case, drop your thoughts down below. But if you enjoy the video, you find it at all insightful, do me a favor and drop a like on it. And if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing to stay up with all things Modern Warfare 3. We've got a ton of stuff upcoming here that I think you guys won't want to miss. So I'd love to have in the community. And finally, check out my friends over at Gamer Advantage, who I still think have code Espresso bumped up to 20% off your entire order. A huge rarity when it comes to that discount. But if you want to check that out, link in the description below. We'll touch on that a little later. For now though, let's jump into Modern Warfare 3's multiplayer beta and how best to improve. Now, before we even jump into the game itself or any individual match, a lot of what we can end up improving about our game can honestly be pinpointed down to some settings. The nice part is that if you are super familiar with Modern Warfare 2 and Warzone, you played a lot of that this year. What's nice is that since everything is now going through the COD HQ, most of, if not all of your settings should be transferred over, which I think is a nice positive of the whole like unified engine and HQ thing. As annoying as the UI and stuff may be, it's nice that that stuff is shared. But if you jump in, I'd recommend adjusting or at least taking a look at a few different settings here for this. Button layout is one that I always end up switching to tactical. That could be something that you find you play better on default, tactical, or any other setting. Sensitivity, this is entirely subjective. I can't give you a specific best answer. I mean, for me, I play on 9.9, but I've also played on various different other sensitivities across different games in the past years. So that's going to take a little bit of practice to see what works best and feels best for you. Auto sprint behavior, you'll want to end up adjusting this so that you have the ability to slide cancel this year as best as possible. For specific controller settings, I'd highly recommend the dynamic aim response curve type. This reverse S-curve mapping is something that makes it a bit more pinpoint precise for how your sticks will react with your actual aiming on your thumbs. Next, I'd recommend the Black Ops aim assist, where this is a traditional aim slowdown, just similar to how you'd see in Black Ops games. Precision and focusing are still very good options, but it's something that I feel Black Ops has just historically been better in my own personal opinion. But my personal favorite thing when it comes to controller settings here this year is that we actually have new dead zone testing, which is a really cool feature that should accurately give you the best input settings for your individual controller. Previously, you kind of had to guess on, okay, I have some stick drift, but I can only estimate where I'm going to need to compensate with that for. But now you can actually end up going into the dead zone inputs where you can test the stick dead zone, where activating this will show you specific details on where your dead zones will kick up and what you need to do to compensate for that. Whereas then you can then accurately adjust that in your left and right stick minimums. That's awesome because, like I said, all you could previously do was estimate in the past, but basically every single controller in the world could, in theory, have a different dead zone based on wear and tear, perhaps manufacturing defects or slight differences, and so on. So that was always something that was incredibly subjective, and I could never give a definitive answer on, okay, here's how you have to set this up. Now that actually helps with it, and it's awesome. Graphic settings, FOV, make sure you end up pumping that up if you guys want to see a bit more of your peripheral vision. Things to turn off, I'd recommend turning off motion blur, film grain. Depth of field is up to you if you want to see a little bit of that blurriness whenever you're aimed down sight or doing weapon inspects, but otherwise you don't need it to be. And then audio settings, again, this is important but very subjective. Audio is very discernible here in this game, so make note of what works best for you. If you end up having something like studio headphones, home theater or headphone bass boost is great for hearing those footstep audio and other things as well. It'll get pretty loud, but it's probably preferred. However, again, this is very subjective because not everyone's playing on studio headsets. Not everyone's playing with earbuds in. Not everybody's playing on a TV speaker or surround sound system. So just make sure you test this out and see what works best for you. But let's talk about some in-game tips, because that is stuff that is across the board, things we can recommend to everybody. First thing, let's talk about pacing, because this is one that this game is much faster than Modern Warfare 2. But here's the thing, myself, I got excited, but I can also make it play a little too fast, which you don't always want to do with that. I found myself quite a bit being overzealous with the movement, wanting to go skating around the map again, but oftentimes I'd get too carried away and then get myself into unwinnable gunfights, putting myself into bad situations. As funny as it sounds, it is okay to slow it down a bit. It's exciting to have that movement again and to want to be able to use that to your advantage, and by no means am I saying don't do that, but also make sure that you're not going too fast. If you find yourself doing what I do, recognize that you don't have to zoom around the map 24/7. Instead, you can utilize some of the other tips we'll touch on, like map and flow awareness, to instead control spawns, to control where enemies will be coming to you, while also still being able to zoom around the map, get out of situations if needed, by utilizing that movement to your advantage. Or again, you could just go full crackhead and go guns a-blazing into the middle of everything, but might get you killed quite a bit. Accuracy is incredibly important in this game as well. The TTK, or time to kill, is much slower by comparison. We saw adjustments to not only just the base health, where it's 150 now instead of 100 in years past, but also we saw a lot of the multipliers for locations on the body adjusted. I think it was Exclusive Ace that ended up just breaking down recently that the headshots, it's about 1.2 instead of a normal, I think it was usually like 1.5, I want to say, for some headshots on weapons. So it's a very drastic difference by comparison, which means you're going to need to land more shots to end up securing kills. Accuracy is going to make or break gunfights. So as we'll touch on in a second, build weapons for accuracy, and if you can find that balance of quickness and control, that's absolutely ideal. But while we have the absence of things like the firing range in the beta, outside of kitting your weapon, finding that in-game rhythm of controlling your shots or being pinpoint precise with your aiming comes down to some of those settings, but also might just take a game or two to get used to before you can end up really jumping into it. Next, coming back to it, map flow is a very big thing, but with the pacing on these classic maps, the things that we have to our advantage now at this point, it's a very important thing to take advantage of. Firstly, be conscious of dead space. This is something that we say every single year, and every single year it holds true. If there's not teammates around you on the minimap, you're probably in enemy territory. Sometimes with the spawns even, you still may be in enemy territory, even if there are teammates around you. The spawns in this game aren't the best as of right now, but for the most part, that sort of rule will always ring true. Dead space on that minimap usually means you should be a little bit more cautious. But also keep an eye out on that minimap, because this year, red dots are again here by default. No perk needed like in Vanguard, and it's the first time we've seen this naturally since Black Ops Cold War. So you can chase those dots or hold your ground by using that information on knowing where the flow of players are going to maybe be coming from, what angle you may need to hold, whatever the case. Just keep an eye on that, and it will absolutely give you the information for how you want to approach the situation. Gunsmith saw a bit of an upgrade here this year with a few things that fundamentally change a little bit about how we can approach gunfights and our weapon builds, things like those aftermarket parts, but for the most part, a lot of it still is pretty self-explanatory. But a couple of things are to, firstly, be conscious of the way you unlock items. Just like in Modern Warfare 2, attachments are tied to specific weapon progression, meaning that ranking up certain weapons will grant you universal use for certain attachments. But that means that if you're looking for a specific red dot or optic, it might not be tied to that weapon you're ranking up, like in games prior before Modern Warfare 2. Instead, you're going to have to rank up a weapon you might not necessarily like to use to get that attachment. So just be conscious that that is going to be something that will dictate how some of these are built. But also, as always, you want to make sure you build your classes for how you want to play the game. If you want to play guns a-blazing, absolutely try and max out things for sprint to fire time, ADS speed, mobility speed. But also, we talked about how control is a huge part of weapon builds in my opinion, so you could do it oppositely where control is your main factor. But additionally, with the way that perks are structured in this game versus Modern Warfare 2, it's very nice that you have a lot of options here. You can end up using things like those stalker boots to give increased strafing during ADS and gunfights, which is honestly a really big help in gunfights, especially at a distance. If you can combine that with being accurate, well, you may end up having a nice leg up on someone who could have a tougher time tracking you as you're strafing faster than they may be used to. Things like Ghost keeps you off the radar, along with a few other muzzle attachments that can prove beneficial as well for that same sort of aspect. So again, it really comes down to preference on that, but make sure you're properly getting your weapons out accordingly. Next, and probably one of the biggest things here that is, well, kind of hit or miss, because I know that I play solo a lot, but also as of recent years, I've played in a party a lot. Playing in a party is a huge benefit to improving your game. I know that for everybody, that's not necessarily possible all of the time, but when it is possible, highly recommend it. It's easier to control the map flow and positioning with players you know are capable and can communicate with. There's more sets of eyes to spot and call out enemies. You may be able to account for more enemies than maybe if you were playing solo. And also, oftentimes, if you play with, let's just say in theory, like a full team, you have a full 6-man, it's pretty hard for matchmaking to find another 6 stack to go against you, and oftentimes you can brute force your way into better lobbies. If you have that communication, that ability to play with all 6 players, well, 6 solos are going to be in for a sore time if that is the case. Now, obviously, you're not always going to have 6 players, but even if you just have 1 or 2 other players at your side helping you, it still can make a world of a difference. And the final tip that honestly may not necessarily be a tip more than just a sort of PSA is that if you're having a bad time, honestly, sometimes just hanging in there can help. Matchmaking is a strange but predictable thing here. Certainly am not advocating for it, but you probably see that in the past there's been tons of reverse boosting gameplay over the years, which is where people will die purposely, have bad games, and then get their way into easier lobbies. Again, not advocating for that at all. I don't think it's worth the time. I don't care enough. But in recent years, we have this thing called retention-based matchmaking, which is kind of the bigger picture to where people describe it as skill-based matchmaking, where each match you are trying to be matched up with players of similar skill. But the grand scheme of things, the game wants you to stay on the game as long as possible. So if you end up having bad games, it's going to feed you a good game every so often. If you start having good games, it's going to feed you some tougher matches where it levels you out a bit. It's this very manipulative system, but it does happen. So if you do have a couple of bad games in a row, again, just sticking it out can sometimes help out because usually there's a good game on the other side of that. So again, not necessarily a real tip, but more of a PSA. And the final thing overall that I want to touch on is, well, just to try out the game, even if it's just for free in a couple of days here when it goes to the free and open access for PlayStation, and the same thing with next week. I mean, this is a beta. It is that time to play around with stuff, experiment with new things, try out different game styles and all things that come along with it, because at the end of the day, none of this matters. None of it ends up transferring to your main year of whatever stats you like tracking or whatever in the case of the full launch build of the game. This, everything's wiped after next weekend, so it doesn't matter. So try it out, play around, and try to hone in on those skills now so that you can have some good games and have some fun, but also you can use those tips and skills learned and apply it to the later game later on down the line. But anyways, that's what we're gonna call it. Before we wrap everything up, make sure you check out my friends over at Gamer Advantage for a 20% off, pretty rare 20% off discount of your entire order of what I think are the best blue light glasses on the market. I've used their frames for 2 years now at this point and have been incredibly happy with every single pair. They just recently launched their new Diablo frames, which for those of you guys that like aviator style glasses, these are absolutely for you. They look awesome, and just like every other pair they have, they hold up big time. I can't do nearly enough justice for the studies, the in-depth details they can provide over on their site. That stuff's all linked below, but what I can tell you is that, again, out of the 2 years that I've been using these, they have absolutely made a help to my daily productivity, and they're probably the best glasses I've had. If you guys want to learn more, honestly, I even encourage just that. Go check out the details to see what they're offering, but if you want to pick something up for yourself, code Espresso again gets you now for a limited time 20% off your entire order. Link down below. But that said, that's what we're gonna call it. That's my tips here for how to improve in the Modern Warfare 3 beta and beyond. So let me know your thoughts down below. Do you agree with these tips? Have anything to add? Whatever the case, drop your thoughts. But if you enjoyed the video, you find it at all insightful, do me a favor and drop a like on it. And if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing to stay updated with all things Modern Warfare 3, multiplayer, and everything beyond. We have a lot of stuff. We're gearing up for the fall here and the launch upcoming, so we've got a very busy schedule upcoming, and I'd love to have you in the community. But for now, thanks so much for watching. My name is Espresso. I'll see you later. Take care, and peace.